All right, for Module 5, we were tasked with creating an organizational relationship structure for our facility or our um, what we are associated with. For mine, the school. So for my district, I think we fit the functional organizational structure. It is a type of like hierarchical, so everything starts at the top and kind of works its way down. These two little blurbs I've got here were taken from the SHRM website. So basically, it says the functional structure divides work and employees by specialization. It is a hierarchical, usually vertical integrated structure. It emphasizes standardization and organization and processes for specialized employees in relatively narrow jobs. And it also says in functional structures, employees report directly to managers within their functional areas, who in turn report to a chief officer of the organization. Management from above must centrally coordinate the specialized departments. I think this one is really fitting for a school because schools do have many different things that you'll see later in the flow chart. You have the teachers on their own levels. You have the diet, like cooks, maintenance, laundry, not laundry, janitors is what I meant to say. You got your board, you've got your principal, your superintendent, you've got all of that. So each one of them serves their own function, and that is really kind of why I think it fits the functional organizational. So what are the advantages of functional organizational structure? Since you're separating by a specialization or role, it allows for the different departments to get efficient at what they are focusing on. They don't have to worry about everything, so they are able to hyperfixate on their task, and that allows them to get more and more efficient because it is something they're going to see repetitively. They're not going to have to worry about changing their goal. They might have different things that cause different needs at the times, but for the most part, they all are just going to focus on what they are a part of. Second, separating out allows the delegation of the tasks to be more easily understood and therefore more efficient. I went on to say if you clarify, then communication is easier. For instance, if the superintendent wants to say something specifically to the teachers, then people that work in the bus barn don't have to worry about listening. If they give a task specifically for the paras, then that is something that only the paras have to worry about. The fact that it's delegated into different roles makes it so much more efficient and easier to communicate. Of course, there's always going to be those times where human error pops up and that changes, but just being separated allows for all these different things to occur. Finally, as I kind of touched on earlier, it allows different roles to be able to focus on self-performance or role performance rather than the performance of everything. If they're not worried about what each department is doing, it will allow them to do their specific job better. Teachers aren't in charge of making sure that all the financial reasons are covered for the school. Janitors aren't in charge of teaching the students history homework. Each department needs to do their own thing, and therefore they're able to do it effectively once they kind of get in the rhythm of it. They work codependently with other people in their role, like teachers work well with teachers. Then they don't try to overstep their bounds with like the janitors or the cooks or anybody else of that kind of department. Alright, so next, what are the disadvantages of functional organizational structure? Overall outlook can be minimized since the different roles are not interacting with one another. It's kind of limiting perspectives. For instance, the view that the superintendent has could be different than what the teachers think. But since there's this chain of the superintendent passes it on to the principal passes it on to the vice principal, this kind of chain and sequence of things kind of loses it and doesn't allow this interaction. The teachers don't go sit down with the cooks and talk about how they think things are going. Obviously, you have your meetings in which everyone's a part of, but this, for the most part, is separated by role and therefore can cause some communication errors in that perspective because you're not getting those different perspectives to commingle and kind of create the best situation. Slow to change because of the need to sweep through each layer sequentially. Like I touched on in the last one, something that starts in the superintendent, by the time it works its way down, will have had to go through so many different layers that it will, one, be slow, and two, will just kind of pass on and can alter as it goes. I'm assuming people have played the telephone game, or like the whisper game, as some people call it, where you give someone a prompt, and then you have them whisper into somebody's ear, and then they whisper, and then they whisper, and they whisper, and by the end, it can be a totally different thing, or it can be, if everyone played it right and heard it properly, it can be the same. And finally, a bad piece in the links allows for the whole thing to have problems because of it. Say, for instance, if one piece, say you have a bad principal who doesn't know what they're doing, or they have a different ideology than the rest, everyone below them will suffer because they're having different messages, and they're not hearing what they need to because of the different views that are happening. This can happen anywhere. It can be a teacher having basically a problem with a para, a janitor having a problem with like the board or the office. All these little things can cause problems if not properly addressed. Alright, so finally my flow chart. So functional organizational, each one kind of follows down hierarchical style. So at the top I have the Board of Education. They really dictate what needs to happen and kind of what happens as it falls down. That trickles down to a superintendent, who is kind of the head of the entire school department there. He kind of makes they make a lot of the decisions on what need to be done. As that splits, we'll go to the left side first. So we'll see the board office. These can be all the different board members and just kind of different people around the building. The reason they're below the superintendent is because they kind of hear what the superintendent's saying and pass it on. Below them, it goes into 4 different ones. We have the maintenance lead, the dietary lead, the bus barn lead, otherwise known as transportation, and then the school nurse. The board passes all their information on. Like I said, you're not going to have a teacher interacting with, or not having a teacher tell the janitors what to do, the cooks what to do, or what the bus drivers to do. That is the responsibility of the office, and therefore they are the ones that kind of fall below that. So obviously those lead into, the maintenance lead leads into the janitors, the dietary lead leads into the cooks, and then the bus bar lead leads into like the bus drivers and all those other different pieces of getting the students home transportation wise. If you go back to superintendent and go down into the right, this kicks us into the principal. This is more the academic side of it. Principal splits off into 4, just like the board office does. In this one, we have the school nurse again, who fits both because they are kind of that middle ground where the principal can talk to them and see what they're feeling and needing. And also the board office can do the same thing. They find out what's important and what's necessary to kind of stick with guidelines and all those different things. So they each serve a different function in interacting with the school nurse. Next, it will be the vice principal, the counselors, and then the principal's secretary. The secretary then goes into parents or vendors. I put this one in the same one because this is going to be like the phone calls of my son or daughter needs to be out because they have a doctor's appointment or they're sick, or list goes on. And it also has vendors in the same one because they're kind of in the same boat in the fact that it's something went wrong in the building. Therefore, you call someone to come look at the lights, someone to come look at the plumbing, things that the other side of it, like the maintenance side of it, can't really carry. This is going to be the bigger project, so that the secretary is kind of the one in constant communication with them. Next, the counselors. Counselors listen to like the principal because it is really helping. This one could also lead into the students just because they interact with the students either as a career assessment style or as like a therapist side of it, essentially, the counselor aspect of it. And then the final one is vice principal, who is basically going to take the word of what the principal wants and pass it on down the line. They lead into the teachers and the special educations director. They're on the same length here because they are side by side doing with the focus on the same thing. The special education director leads into the paras because they're kind of under the department of that. I also, on the other side, have teachers leading into teacher's assistant and paras because the teacher is kind of like the owner of that classroom, essentially. So anyone that comes in really needs to kind of pay attention and focus on what needs to be done or what's being said. So I think teachers, assistants, and paras fit into that same category. And then underneath the teacher's assistants, I have students. So essentially students in this one are the bottom of the rung just because everyone else holds more power in the school compared to them. But all in all, there goes this top is the Board of Education, falls all the way, trickles through the school, down all the way to the students. We have interaction with students, we have interaction with the paras, we have all the different staff and like the board members in the community. So everyone really falls into the flow chart here, and that's why I think it kind of fits. And then finally here at the end, I have my references. Thank you so much.